Probably wondering what the fuck I'm doing wearing a shirt that says luck is for leprechauns and you ain't green. Why am I wearing a shirt like that on a day like today? I mean, like, I don't get it, right? Well, I want to talk about strategies because if you can't depend on luck because you're not a leprechaun or you're not green, then what do you have to depend on? Effort. You got to put in the effort to get whatever it is that you want. Now, as it relates to building muscle, effort's only part of the equation because if you do everything without any rhyme or reason, your luck is going to run out. Unfortunately, a lot of people seem to think that all they need to do is put in the time and effort that they believe is necessary, and they don't actually need a strategy. Hope is their strategy. Hope is not a strategy. As a strategy, hope is nothing more than total fucking bullshit. You're going to need a better strategy than that if you want to build muscle. So the first thing you need to understand is there's 3 ways that you can trigger growth in the first place. Mechanical tension, muscle damage, metabolic stress. The difference between the 3 is the recovery requirement. So some people would say, why don't I try to stimulate and trigger growth through all 3 pathways? Well, you could, but there's a recovery requirement. You want to produce growth through mechanical tension, there's a recovery requirement. Through muscle damage, there's a greater recovery requirement. And through metabolic stress, there's a recovery requirement, but it's the least of the 3. So one of the rules, if you want to build the most amount of muscle possible through your efforts, is to train as frequently as humanly possible without overworking your capacity to recover. You don't need to lift heavy weights to build muscle. So you can cater what you're doing to promote the physiological response that you're there to get in the first place. And if you can do it in a way that limits the amount of recovery required, then you're putting yourself in a position to facilitate the greatest gains to be made. So what I have here is the framework for how you should go about structuring a workout to promote growth through the metabolic stress pathways. Now, before we get started, I got to say, you're not going to see a lot of set and rep recommendations here. It's about promoting a physiological response. There's no magic to a number. So you'll see these charts that will say to train for strength, you do 1 to 5 reps. For hypertrophy, you do 8 to 12. For endurance, you do 13 to 20 or 25 or whatever. And what happens is people will fixate on these arbitrary numbers because they will believe that there is magic in the number. There's no magic in 8 reps. There's no magic in 10. There's no magic in 12. If you produced momentum to lower the mass to overcome, to make your muscles do less work just to get to 8, 9, 10, or 11, or 12, then you missed the forest for the trees. You're not imposing a demand. It's about imposing a demand. So I understand the benefits to having a set and rep target. It's kind of like having a bullseye if you're playing darts. If you don't have a bullseye to shoot at, then you're just throwing darts at what, really, right? It's a waste of time and it's a waste of your effort. But the difference between playing darts and training your body is the bullseye is constant when you play darts. It's fixed, it's not moving. With your body, the bullseye is moving because your body's constantly reacting to what you're doing. So you have to make the appropriate course correction as you go to ensure that you hit the bullseye at the end. So it's for these reasons, there's not a lot of set and rep recommendations. Now, as it relates to training to promote growth through metabolic stress, this will appeal most to people who have like a form of ADD almost, where they can't stay focused on the task at hand or they get bored easily. Because training to promote growth through metabolic stress encourages lots of exercises to be used and opens the door for lots of methods and techniques to be included in the training. So this encourages people to be more engaged in what they're actually doing. It's more fun for the most part, for lack of a better term. So here's the framework. It's 3 steps. If you do these 3 steps, if you can practically apply it to your workouts, you're putting yourself in the best position possible to stimulate growth through metabolic stress. Now, the first thing is 40 to 60 seconds of eccentric tension. So whatever muscle you're training, you pick an exercise. The tool for the job is based on what you need to work on. So you pick the exercise based on what, where you need to target the most, and then how you perform it. 40 to 60 seconds of eccentric tension. You can do this however you want. You can do 1 rep where you lower for 40 to 60 seconds, but the weight might not be heavy enough. I'd recommend something along the lines of 1 to 2 sets, 6 to 8 reps with a 6 to 8 second eccentric. Yes, I said there's not going to be a lot of set and rep recommendations. That's actually one of only 2 on the board for the most part. And what you're doing here, you're picking a weight that you could lift like 12 to 16 times, but due to the enhanced eccentric, you're only going to aim for about half as many reps, and that will accumulate to give you 40 to 60 seconds of eccentric tension. Why do you want to do that? Because when the muscles are being lengthened under load, an enzyme is released from the Z lines in the muscles, which is the first step of a series of steps that results in turning on mTOR. This is going to reduce protein degradation and promote protein synthesis. It's going to put your body in a state of muscle building. So you want to do that at the beginning of your workout. From there, step 2, impose a fucking demand. Now the demand is relative. If you were trying to promote growth through mechanical tension or muscle damage, you would do things a little bit differently. It's implied that since we want to promote growth through metabolic stress, it's not about the weight. We want to accumulate as much metabolites as possible in the muscles from our efforts. So the first thing I do with anyone that wants to train with me to promote growth through metabolic stress, create an oxygen debt. Make them go outside their comfort zone. You'll always hear successful people say things along the lines of, if you want to be successful, you got to step outside your comfort zone. The same applies to training. Remember, we're not trying to lift max weight. So if you're waiting until you're ready to go, you've waited too long. We want to minimize rest, create an oxygen debt, because there's enhanced neural drive when you're training in an oxygen debt. It's to your benefit, even though it's just harder to do. You want to extend the time under tension. This is where it's the most fun, especially for those people who get bored of training very, very quickly, because this recommends that you do high reps, drop sets, rest pause, supersets, giant sets, pre-exhaust, post-exhaust, whatever you want. You have all of this at your disposal. You get to pick what you want to do, and that's what makes it fun. Constant tension, the way you do your reps, slow, do partials, do isometrics. Find ways to increase the demand placed on the muscle. If you do all of this, what happens is you increase local growth factors, IGF-1, IGF-2, MGF. You'll also turn on cell signaling pathways that have been linked to growth, EPK, PKB, TORC1, ERK, which is a time under tension dependent pathway. So if you do this, train in an oxygen debt, find ways to extend the time under tension and keep the muscles under constant tension, you're putting yourself in the best position possible to promote growth through metabolic stress. That's pretty much the work right there. But you want to finish with loaded stretching, 3 to 5 minutes of loaded stretching. So basically, whatever muscle you trained, pick an exercise that's going to stretch that muscle against the load, and you hold that for 45 to 60 seconds. If you can hold it for a minute and a half, increase the weight. Use a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. So if you did a minute of a stretch, a minute of rest, you should be done within 5 minutes. It doesn't take long. The benefits to this: increase IGF-1 receptor sensitivity. Also stretches the series elastic component and parallel elastic component of the muscle. Therefore, there's greater transference to when you need the flexibility and the mobility the most. One of the things I see people do is they do this passive stretching. And when you're doing it, you're stretching the parallel elastic component of the muscle only. You're going to increase your flexibility and your mobility only when the muscles are not engaged. When do you need to be more flexible? When do you need that mobility? When the muscles are working. So if you want to have actual greater transference over to when you need the mobility, you do the loaded stretching. It makes more sense. So that right there is the framework to how you should go about structuring your workouts to promote the greatest growth response, at least as it relates to using metabolic stress to do so. If you like this information, share it. This is probably one of the most valuable pieces of information you'll ever come across as it relates to structuring a workout to build muscle through metabolic stress. It's all there. It's very, very simple. A lot of this stuff I've talked about independently before, kind of like giving you pieces to a puzzle, but I never really showed you what the puzzle looked like. Number one, I can't, because everybody is different. There are different factors and variables that need to be taken into consideration. So what I've done here is I've at least structured the workout in such a way that here's where this piece goes, here's where this piece goes, and here's where this piece goes. If you can practically apply this, it's not about sets and reps, it's about imposing a fucking demand. And if you can do that, you're putting yourself in the best position to build the most amount of muscle possible, and also not doing it in a way where your recovery requirements are going to be as high as they could be. This will facilitate more workouts to be performed, and the more you train without overworking your capacity to recover, the greater result you're going to get. You like the information yourself? Click the fucking button at the bottom, subscribe to the channel, support me, and I'll keep bringing you the absolute best information you're going to find as it relates to training to build muscle.